November 1943, North Sea, altitude lost in cloud. A gray world swallowed the sky, where 30 flying fortresses droned in formation, their aluminum skins streaked with ice. Inside the tail of one B-17, the world narrowed to glass, steel, and nerves. The gunner's breath frosted his mask. The twin 50 caliber guns hummed under gloved hands. Below him, the sea was invisible, only emptiness and threat. The intercom crackled with clipped words, the kind men use when fear becomes routine. Then came it, a shimmer in the clouds, sunlight flashing on something moving fast. Messerschmitts. 3, maybe 4, diving in from below. He twisted his turret, vision blocked by vapor and smoke, trusting reflex over sight. The horizon spun, tracers tore through mist. One long burst fired blind, aimed at a flash he could barely see. Seconds later, explosions rippled through the haze. The squadron's rear watch shouted in disbelief. 3 fighters gone, 1 blind shot, and a gunner whose name history almost forgot. By late 1943, the skies above Europe had become an unending battlefield. Every day, hundreds of American bombers rose from England's airfields, engines thundering over hedgerows and mist. Their mission was simple in theory: cripple Nazi industry, destroy transport networks, and break Germany's ability to wage war. But between those plans and survival lay a gauntlet of fire. The United States Army Air Forces, particularly the 8th Air Force, believed daylight precision bombing could end the war faster. Yet in practice, precision meant flying straight into swarms of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs with no place to hide. The bombers were slow, predictable, and visible for miles. Fighters tore into them from above and below, turning the open sky into a furnace of tracers and smoke. Each B-17 flying fortress carried 10 men: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, and 5 gunners who stood between life and falling fire. The tail gunner was the loneliest of them all. Separated by the fuselage's narrow spine, crouched in a metal bubble barely large enough for a man to move, he stared backward into the abyss. It was his task to defend what everyone else couldn't see: the invisible approach of death from behind. Survival odds were brutal. In 1943, a bomber crew's tour of duty meant 25 missions. Few completed them. German defenses had matured into an organized machine. Radar stations along the coast tracked incoming formations. Flak batteries positioned in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands filled the sky with exploding steel. Above them, Luftwaffe Gruppen waited, their fighters ready to slice into the bomber streams. At first, the American formations were unsupported. Escort fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang lacked the range to follow bombers deep into Germany. That meant for long stretches, especially over the North Sea and occupied Europe, the B-17s were alone. Crews called those hours the Black Gap. Inside the bombers, training met terror. Men had been drilled endlessly: how to calculate lead angles, how to fire short bursts, how to switch oxygen bottles in sub-zero air. But none of that prepared them for the moment the first contrails of enemy fighters appeared above. The sound of intercom chatter grew clipped, heartbeats loud inside the helmet. Every mission blurred into noise, cold, and tension. The B-17, however, was built for punishment. Its 4 Wright Cyclone engines could limp home even when 1 or 2 were gone. Its design, overlapping aluminum skins, reinforced spars, and self-sealing fuel tanks, made it one of the toughest aircraft in the war. Crews believed in their fortress. They had to. The tail gunner's domain, the Sperry A6 turret, was both engineering marvel and coffin. A pair of Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns sat inches from his face, connected to ammunition belts that snaked down the fuselage. Controls were powered electrically, movement smooth but limited. Visibility was a cruel irony. Wide horizontal field, but blind directly below and above. The position demanded trust, in training, in instinct, and in the formation flying ahead. Enemy pilots knew this blind spot well. The Luftwaffe had developed tactics exploiting every weakness of the bomber boxes. Fighters attacked in coordinated groups, using sun glare and altitude advantage to approach unseen. Some dove head-on. Others rolled inverted beneath the formation, firing upward into fuel tanks and belly gunners. But the most feared were the rear assaults, fast, deadly, and often decisive. By autumn 1943, the 8th Air Force was bleeding crews faster than replacements could arrive. Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Bremen, missions that became synonymous with disaster. Yet still, the bombers flew. Each new sortie brought new stories. A pilot landing with one wing shredded, a gunner shooting down an enemy as his own aircraft burned, a formation returning with only half its strength. Within that relentless pattern of survival, acts of improbable instinct stood out. Moments where men reacted beyond logic, guided by training so deep it felt like instinct. The blind shot of one tail gunner would soon join those legends. But to understand its meaning, one must see the vast machine of war it belonged to. Thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of airmen, and a doctrine built on persistence rather than luck. In the cold light of Northern Europe, courage wasn't loud. It was mechanical, repetitive, and precise, like the rhythmic chug of a Browning 50, or the steady hum of engines pushing through flak-blackened skies. And as the year 1943 closed, the mission that would etch one gunner's name into memory was being briefed under Low English. Clouds. The squadron that flew that day belonged to the 8th Air Force's strategic bombing campaign, a relentless, grinding mission from airfields spread across eastern England. Their base was a sprawl of muddy runways, corrugated hangars, and Nissen huts warmed by coal stoves. Every morning, crews were woken by the same ritual, engines coughing to life, the distant echo of bombers warming up across the countryside, the smell of oil and cold air mixing into a scent that clung to everything. The men who manned these bombers were young, many barely past 20. Tail gunners especially were chosen for size and temperament. The turret demanded someone compact enough to fit and calm enough to aim, while the world exploded inches away. Training taught them firing arcs, deflection angles, and teamwork. But never how to deal with silence after each burst of gunfire. The B-17 Flying Fortress had evolved since its first missions over Europe. Early versions lacked armor and defensive coordination, but by 1943, engineers had turned it into a flying fortress in more than name. Each bomber carried up to 13 guns, covering almost every approach. The tail turret was redesigned for flexibility, giving the gunner a swivel of more than 90 degrees. The guns themselves were masterpieces of reliability. Browning M2s firing nearly 800 rounds per minute each, their metallic rhythm a sound every bomber crew came to trust more than their heartbeat. Yet even this fortress had limits. The Luftwaffe studied formation patterns and adapted. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s began coordinated attacks from the rear quarter, the weakest point in overlapping arcs of fire. They came in fast, diving through cloud and sunlight, using the bomber's speed disadvantage against them. In response, tail gunners became the fleet's eyes, early warning sensors before radar or radar jamming reached its maturity. Each mission briefing drilled that home. "You see them first, you save lives," officers repeated. But in truth, it was never that simple. Visibility was often near zero. Clouds over the North Sea rolled thick as cement. Contrails stretched like scars across the horizon. On some days, gunners fired not at shapes, but at motion. Flashes in the mist, shadows among sunlight. It was in these uncertain spaces that survival depended less on sight, and more on instinct. The Luftwaffe's defense of occupied Europe was tightening. Bases across France and the Low Countries kept interceptor wings on constant alert. The German radar network, known as Freya and Würzburg, gave early warnings of incoming bomber streams, allowing fighters to climb and position themselves for attack long before the Americans reached their targets. By late 1943, Luftwaffe units like Jagdgeschwader 1 and Jagdgeschwader 26 had become veteran hunter groups. Their pilots had hundreds of sorties behind them, their skills honed through years of fighting on multiple fronts. Against such experience, even the formidable B-17 formations could be overwhelmed. This reality bred a particular kind of determination among American crews. An understanding that courage wasn't a surge of emotion, but a condition you wore daily. You climbed into your bomber knowing you might not return. Yet you still checked your guns, adjusted your flak jacket, and trusted your crew. Tail gunners developed their own rituals, tapping the turret glass twice before engine start, counting ammunition belts aloud, whispering a quick line from home before locking themselves into the turret. They joked about having the best seat in the house, though everyone knew it was also the coldest, loneliest one. Among those gunners was a young man whose name would later echo through briefings as legend, not because of rank, medals, or speeches, but because of one impossible moment when instinct triumphed over visibility. His crew knew him as quiet, focused, methodical. He kept his gloves folded the same way before every flight, cleaned his twin Brownings after every mission, and never spoke much beyond short answers on the intercom. That mission, a bombing run toward targets on the German coast, began like countless others. Engines thundered, bomb loads secured, formations formed over the English coastline before crossing into hostile airspace. The enemy waited somewhere beyond the clouds, unseen but certain. Every man aboard those aircraft knew that beyond the routine briefing maps and mechanical checklists lay chaos, the kind that left empty bunks in the barracks by nightfall. The 8th Air Force's campaign was grinding the Luftwaffe down, but at an immense cost. The balance between survival and sacrifice had narrowed to a thread. And within that fragile thread, inside one tailed turret somewhere over the gray waters of the North Sea, fate prepared to test the limits of instinct and chance, setting the stage for the shot that would defy belief and become part of aviation legend. Inside the tail of a flying fortress, time moved differently. Every vibration of the aircraft felt personal. Each shudder of the fuselage transmitted through steel into the gunner's bones. He was alone, sealed off from his crew by the length of the bomb bay and waist section. Through his turret glass, the world existed only in fragments, clouds, contrails, and sudden bursts of light. The cold cut deeper there than anywhere else. Temperatures at altitude dropped below freezing, frost forming on gun barrels, oxygen masks stiffening with ice. Most gunners were 19 or 20. They had been trained in gunnery schools scattered across America, places like Tyndall Field in Florida or Las Vegas Army Airfield. There, they learned to fire at towed targets, calculate deflection angles, and handle Browning M2s as if extensions of their arms. But nothing in training simulated the feeling of real combat. The vibration of engines, the claustrophobia, the knowledge that at any moment, a single burst from a German cannon could rip through the fuselage and end everything. Inside the tail, isolation carried a psychological weight. The intercom connected him to voices he rarely saw, but those voices were his lifeline. When the pilot called out, "Bandits at 6 o'clock high," the tail gunner was already scanning, heart pounding, eyes straining through the turret glass. He lived half in anticipation, half in reflex, one eye watching, one hand always on the trigger levers. They developed small habits to survive mentally. Some gunners sang softly into their masks to steady nerves. Others fixed photographs of home near the gun sight. Mothers, wives, girlfriends smiling through frost and fear. A few named their turrets like others named planes. The Last Post, Dead End, Angel's Nest. In that confined world, superstition and discipline blurred together, and yet, behind the constant fear, there was pride. Every gunner knew the crew depended on him. Without his vigilance, the bomber was blind to its most vulnerable direction. Pilots trusted him as much as they trusted their instruments. A single warning shouted through the intercom. "Fighters! Low! 6!" could save 10 men. It was a heavy responsibility carried by the youngest aboard. In the quiet between attacks, they had moments to think. About home, about the odds, about why they kept flying. Letters from families often reached them days after missions that never ended well. Still, each morning they strapped in again, checking their guns with the precision of ritual. Courage, for them, was not cinematic bravado. It was consistency in the face of repetition. Courage as routine. The B-17's tails section was a triumph of wartime engineering. Compact, balanced, and deadly within its narrow field of fire. The Sperry A-6 tail turret, introduced mid-war, offered smoother traverse and better armor protection than earlier designs. It used hydraulic motors powered by the aircraft's electrical system, allowing the gunner to rotate and elevate the turret with minimal effort. The guns, twin 50-caliber Browning M2s, were simple yet devastating. Each weapon fed from a 500-round belt, giving the gunner roughly 60 seconds of total firing time. The 50-caliber round was chosen for its range and stopping power, capable of tearing through light armor and aircraft fuselages alike. The gunner aimed using a computing gun sight that adjusted automatically for target movement and bullet drop, a revolutionary device for its time. But the position had flaws. Visibility remained limited, especially downward. Frost buildup often obscured glass, and vibration could throw off aim. During long missions, the hydraulic systems occasionally froze, leaving the gunner to move the turret manually. Ammunition belts jammed. Oxygen lines iced over. A failure at the wrong time meant helplessness. Communication with the rest of the crew was another constant challenge. The tail gunner's intercom line ran the full length of the aircraft. Any damage or disconnection isolated him completely. Many gunners carried hand signals or prearranged light flashes to communicate if the line went dead. It was an imperfect system in an environment where seconds meant survival. The turret's armor, just a few millimeters of aluminum and steel, could stop small fragments, but not cannon shells. A direct hit from a 20mm round turned the rear fuselage into twisted wreckage. Crews learned to respect the fragility of their defenses. The fortress was durable, yes, but its strength was collective. Overlapping guns, coordinated fire, and mutual protection. Alone, even the most armored bomber was vulnerable. Technically, the B-17 was a marvel of endurance, but the real weapon was its crew coordination. The tail gunner's call triggered a chain reaction. Waist gunners swung to assist. Top turret aimed to cover. Pilots adjusted formation. In those moments, 10 men functioned as one organism, each relying on the other's precision. That unity gave the B-17 its reputation. German pilots feared its defensive fire as much as its bombs. They learned to attack in coordinated bursts, never alone, striking fast and withdrawing before the fortress's defenses fully responded. The American solution, tighter formations, turned the sky into a geometric fortress, hundreds of guns overlapping into one deadly web. For the tail gunner, that meant every mission was both an individual test and a collective performance. His eyes, hands, and instincts were part of something larger, the mechanical rhythm of war that turned fear into function. It was within this complex system of engineering and endurance that one gunner, somewhere over the North Sea, would soon act on instinct so pure it defied calculation. His shot would emerge not from luck or precision instruments, but from that human-machine bond reflex meeting machinery, and machinery meeting chance. By the end of 1943, daylight bombing had evolved into a battle of patterns. The 8th Air Force's bombers flew in box formations. 9 to 12 aircraft staggered at different altitudes, forming a grid of overlapping fire. It looked orderly on paper, but in the air it was chaos organized by necessity. Each gunner covered the blind spots of others. The tail gunner, positioned at the rearmost point, became the formation's rear sentry. German fighter doctrine countered this precision with its own orchestration. Jagdgeschwader groups launched in waves, often 20 to 40 aircraft at a time. They climbed high, used the sun as cover, and dived through formations at incredible speed. Bf-109s and FW-190s came from multiple vectors, trying to break the bomber box's symmetry. Head-on attacks caused panic. Rear assaults finished what chaos began. Tactically, the Luftwaffe's goal was not always destruction, sometimes just disruption. A broken formation meant weaker defensive coverage, and isolated bombers became easy prey. German pilots timed attacks in sequences, a high cover group engaging escorts, a lower group slashing through bombers, and stragglers circling for the kill. For the tail gunner, survival meant reading the rhythm of attack before it arrived. He learned to recognize tiny patterns, contrails forming arcs, sunlight flashes off canopies, or the faint smoke trails of climbing engines. Every sense mattered. A single hesitation could mean a Messerschmitt firing cannon shells into the tail. The B-17's defensive success depended on teamwork. Gunners communicated targets using clock positions: 6 low, 7 high, 9 level. The formation's symmetry allowed mutual cover. One gunner's call alerted others. The best crews acted with near-telepathic coordination. Still, even in perfect formation, gaps existed. Cloud banks, sun glare, or flak bursts could isolate a bomber for seconds, enough for attackers to strike. The gunner's blind shot would later be studied in briefings because it broke every expectation of combat logic. He had fired without clear sight, guided by reflex born of repetition. It wasn't chance. It was conditioned instinct. Gunners fired thousands of rounds in training, memorizing the feel of deflection rather than the sight of it. When the German fighters appeared that day, he reacted with those embedded calculations, firing at where the enemy would be, not where they were. In an environment of fractions, seconds, degrees, bursts, such instinct was survival's highest form of intelligence. The tactical world of air warfare left no room for second guesses. Each decision was binary: shoot or die. Behind the mechanical precision and tactical coordination lay an invisible moral burden, one that few outside those aluminum shells ever understood. A tail gunner's role was both defensive and deadly. He did not choose his targets. He reacted. Each silhouette that appeared through his sight meant either kill or be killed. There was no pause for conscience, only the training that took its place. Crews rarely spoke about what they saw after missions. Some carried the memory of enemy pilots bailing out, parachutes opening like flowers amid smoke. Others witnessed no parachutes at all, aircraft exploding mid-air, vanishing into vapor. The moral line blurred in those frozen heights. Survival demanded detachment, but humanity lingered. Many gunners later admitted that after combat, they felt both relief and guilt in equal measure. The Air Force emphasized professionalism over emotion. Reports praised effective gunnery, confirmed kills, exceptional accuracy. But beneath those terms were human stories. Trembling hands, whispered prayers, exhaustion so deep that men fell asleep beside still-hot gun barrels. The war machine counted numbers. Individuals counted breaths. For the gunner, courage meant enduring repetition, mission after mission, loss after loss. When friends failed to return, new replacements took their bunks by morning. They learned not to ask names too quickly. Survival was its own form of isolation. Moral endurance also meant continuing to function amid destruction. The gunner's eyes saw everything first and last. Enemy aircraft approaching, comrades falling, formations burning. Yet his duty was mechanical. Keep firing, keep watching. He existed in a paradox where duty required emotionless focus, but the consequences were deeply human. In letters home, gunners rarely wrote about combat. They mentioned weather, food, or mail delays. What they left unsaid were the moments between life and loss, seconds that could not be explained without reliving them. This silence became part of their strength. It allowed them to keep flying. The bond within each crew was built on shared endurance, not conversation. When one of them performed an act that defied reason, like bringing down 3 enemy fighters in 30 seconds, others didn't question how. They simply understood what it meant. In the moral economy of the air war, heroism wasn't defined by medals or rank. It was measured by reliability. The man who did his job, who never panicked, who made one impossible decision at the right moment. That was why the blind shot resonated beyond its immediate effect. It wasn't just about marksmanship. It was a reflection of what war forced men to become. Part machine, part instinct. Entirely human beneath layers of ice and steel. The mission continued that day, as it always did. Bombers pressing forward through cloud and fire. Enemy fighters circling like hawks. But in that single burst of unseen gunfire, something shifted in the pattern of survival itself. It showed that even in the most mechanical war humanity had ever waged, chance still bowed to courage. The morning had begun with low clouds rolling over the English coast, the kind that promised both cover and confusion. The formation of B-17s climbed steadily into the gray, each aircraft tracing a vapor trail across the damp November sky. Below, the channel disappeared into fog. Above, sunlight struggled to pierce the cloud deck. Somewhere beyond lay the German coastline. And waiting there, the defenders who had made these skies their hunting ground. Inside the lead bomber, voices filled the intercom. Checklists, confirmations, the mechanical rhythm of war. But in the tail turret of one aircraft flying rear right, the world had narrowed to a single circle of glass and steel. The gunner, young, steady-handed, and already deep into his mission routine, adjusted his oxygen mask and tested the traverse of his guns. Smooth. Ready. Flak bursts began first, distant black flowers blooming in the clouds. Each explosion trembled through the fuselage. The formation tightened instinctively, the pilots compensating for turbulence as fragments rattled against aluminum skins. The gunner's view was a storm of smoke and vapor, a shifting wall where threats could hide in plain sight. Then came the call, "Bandits! 6 o'clock low!" The words hit the intercom like a jolt. He pressed his eyes to the sight, scanning the gray horizon. At first, there was nothing. Just cloud layers twisting like waves. Then a flash. Sunlight glinting on a wingtip. Another. Then movement. Small. Fast. Deliberate. Messerschmitts. They came in tight formation, 3 fighters angling upward from the mist. Their black crosses flickered through vapor. The tail gunner's heart hammered, but his breathing stayed even. He had done this before, countless times in training, several times in combat. Yet every attack felt new, unpredictable. The fighters climbed in perfect synchronization, using the bomber's blind spot. Their cannons would be in range within seconds. The gunner's voice was calm as he called out, 3 fighters closing, 6 low. His words relayed forward, the crew bracing for impact. The first tracers from the Messerschmitts streaked upward, orange comets slicing through gray. One burst tore through the airframe's underside. Another rattled against the tail. The gunner swung his turret left, then right, searching for the lead attacker. The cloud glare blinded him. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Instinct replaced sight. He fired short bursts, feeling the vibration echo through his arms. The smell of gunpowder filled the turret. Empty shell casings clattered down into the fuselage. He saw nothing but flashes and smoke. The enemy's cannon fire roared closer. The tail shook violently. Fragments tore through insulation. His training resurfaced. The endless calculations drilled into reflex. Estimate angle, deflection, closure rate. Don't wait for sight. Anticipate movement. His hands moved faster than thought, twisting the turret toward where the next attack should come from. The intercom crackled. "They're right on us!" Then silence. He saw it then. A shadow cutting through cloud, barely visible. Without thinking, he squeezed the triggers. The twin Brownings roared, tracers carving into the gray. He couldn't see the target, only the faint shimmer of movement. Yet the pattern felt right. The barrels glowed, smoke coiling around the turret glass. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a flash, one explosion in the mist. Another, and then a third. 3 bursts of flame bloomed across the horizon, silhouettes of fighters breaking apart mid-air. The formation's rear watch shouted over the intercom, disbelief laced with adrenaline. "3 down! They're gone! All 3!" The gunner didn't answer. He simply held the grips, breathing through fogged glass, trying to process what had happened. His ammunition belts still fed smoothly. The vibration of the guns slowed. Outside, debris fluttered like falling leaves through the clouds. The bomber shuddered again, not from hits now, but from turbulence. The pilot's voice came through, calm but charged. "Tail, confirm. Did you get them?" He managed only a brief reply. "They're gone, sir." In that moment, silence reclaimed the sky. The cloud layer closed behind the wreckage. The formation continued its flight path, engines steady, bomb doors preparing for the next stage of the mission. But inside that one turret, something had shifted. The shot had been blind, fired through instinct, not aim, yet it had achieved what precision gunnery manuals never promised. Below, somewhere in the cold waters of the North Sea, 3 Messerschmitts fell into oblivion. The crew could hardly believe it. Over the intercom came laughter. Short, disbelieving, the kind that hides relief. The pilot ordered a quick damage check. The tail was scarred, but intact. The gunner, covered in frost and gun smoke, flexed his hands and looked again through the glass. Nothing but gray. In later reports, the event would be summarized in a single line. Tail gunner engaged 3 enemy aircraft, all destroyed. Yet, what couldn't be captured on paper was the moment itself. That fragment of time where fear, skill, and reflex converged into something beyond explanation. The formation crossed deeper into enemy airspace, their course arrowing toward industrial targets hidden beneath drifting layers of haze. But inside that one B-17, the crew could think of little else but the tail. The gunner had not seen his targets. He had felt them. It seemed impossible that such instinct could produce precision. Minutes passed. No more fighters appeared. The air around them seemed eerily calm, like the world had momentarily paused to process what had just occurred. The radio operator broke the silence first. "Tail, say again. You got 3? His voice was part disbelief, part admiration. The gunner hesitated, still peering through the turret glass. "Affirmative," he said finally. 3 confirmed. I saw 2 explode, 1 break apart. He could hardly trust his own words. The clouds still drifted past, calm now, almost innocent. His hands trembled faintly. He flexed his fingers to shake off the stiffness of recoil. The rest of the crew began murmuring over the intercom, restrained, professional, yet edged with awe. The pilot's voice came through again. "Keep eyes sharp. No one relaxes until we're clear." Orders resumed. They had a bombing run to complete, and so they pressed forward. When they reached the target zone, the bomb doors opened, and hundreds of pounds of ordnance tumbled into the haze below. Explosions rippled through the industrial landscape, shaking the air. The formation banked away, engines roaring at full throttle for the return flight home. But even as they left the smoke behind, every man aboard that aircraft carried the same thought. How had he done it? As they neared the English coast again, British radar stations tracked their return. The airfields below prepared for landing. Crews gathered near the runways, scanning the sky for the familiar silhouettes of homecoming fortresses. When the B-17 finally touched down, its landing gear groaning under the weight of exhaustion and damage, ground crews swarmed it immediately. Bullet holes peppered the tail section. The metal skin was shredded in places, paint scorched where cannon shells had glanced. Yet somehow it had stayed airborne. The gunner emerged from his turret slowly, his flight jacket soaked in sweat despite the cold. Mechanics stared at the torn aluminum behind him, shaking their heads. One of them muttered, "Shouldn't have stayed together." Inside debriefing, the air smelled of coffee and oil. The commanding officer, a major who had seen too many crews not return, leaned over the mission reports with a weary expression. "You're telling me you shot down 3 without visual?" he asked, more skeptical than curious. "Yes, sir," the gunner replied. His voice was steady now, though his body still trembled from adrenaline. "Fired by instinct. Tracers connected. Saw explosions through cloud breaks." The major exhaled through his nose, half a smile breaking through disbelief. "We'll verify through other crews." Hours later, confirmations began to arrive. 3 separate bomber crews, all positioned near the rear flank, reported seeing 3 German fighters struck almost simultaneously. One had exploded in midair, another had spiraled into the sea, and a third had disintegrated after losing a wing. The room fell silent when the intelligence officer read the reports aloud. It was no coincidence. It was real. The next morning, the squadron bulletin carried the brief note. Tail gunner credited with 3 confirmed kills in single engagement. No fanfare, no exaggeration, just the cold precision of military record-keeping. Yet within the base, the story spread faster than any communiqué. Men in flight jackets gathered around mess tables, retelling it in fragments. "Blind shot," someone called it. "Didn't even see the bastards," said another. It became more than a report. It became legend, a reminder that sometimes survival hinged not on perfect vision, but on instinct sharpened by repetition and trust. Across the channel, Luftwaffe recovery teams confirmed the loss of 3 Messerschmitts within the same area and time frame. Their pilots never returned. In later days, the gunner's name appeared briefly in operational summaries circulated to higher command. Analysts reviewed the trajectory data, ammunition counts, and even the firing sequence logged by the aircraft's tail camera. A mechanical eye that confirmed his burst pattern matched the downed fighter's last recorded approach angles. What they found was extraordinary. The firing line had been nearly perfect, the deflection angle precise to fractions of a second, even though the gunner had fired blind. For most, it was a miracle. For those who understood the science of air combat, it was something else, the ultimate validation of training, reflex, and discipline. Reporters would later visit the airfield, interviewing returning crews for morale features. When they reached the gunner, he said little. One journalist asked, "What did you see before you fired?" He paused, then answered quietly, "Nothing. Just knew where they'd be." It wasn't arrogance. It was something closer to humility, the kind that grows in men who have stared into chaos and acted without thought of glory. His aircraft was photographed soon after, its tail patched with aluminum plates where cannon shells had torn through. The image circulated across Allied newsletters, not as propaganda, but as proof of endurance, a symbol of the strange precision that war could draw out of ordinary men. For the gunner's squadron, The event marked a psychological shift. Morale soared. If a man could down 3 fighters without sight, then perhaps luck favored them yet. Crews went into the next missions with renewed confidence, but also deeper respect for the invisible edge between calculation and chaos. And for the German pilots who faced those formations afterward, rumors spread too. Whispers among the Luftwaffe. The Americans have tail gunners who shoot through clouds. Of course, it wasn't true. There was no magic, no unseen weapon. Only a man, his turret, and a decision made in less than a heartbeat. One that changed the balance of an entire engagement. The skies quieted after that mission, but the legend of the blind shot continued to echo across airfields and barracks alike. It was retold by gunners cleaning their barrels, by navigators tracing maps, by pilots studying enemy patterns. It became a lesson that sometimes instinct isn't blind at all. When dawn broke over the English airfields the following day, the frost glistened across endless rows of B-17s, metal sentinels awaiting their next call. The crews who returned were silent, weary, and marked by the kind of exhaustion that never left the eyes. But within the scattered laughter of relief, a single story stood apart: the blind shot that had dropped 3 German fighters in seconds. The debriefing reports made their way upward through command channels. Analysts at the 8th Air Force's Operations Branch reviewed the engagement log, tail camera footage, and eyewitness confirmations. The pattern was undeniable. 3 enemy aircraft destroyed almost simultaneously during a single burst of defensive fire. It wasn't luck, they concluded. It was geometry, reflex, and composure under pressure. The 3 elements every gunner was trained to master, but rarely combined so perfectly. To the airmen who read the bulletin, it became something more. It was proof that skill still mattered in a war increasingly dominated by machinery and attrition. For weeks afterward, tail gunners across England's bases talked about it. Not as myth, but as motivation. The brass took notice, too. Tactical analysts studying formation defense used the incident as a teaching case. Training officers began revising turret drills, emphasizing predictive awareness rather than visual dependence. Fire where they'll be, not where they are, one instructor told recruits, quoting the unknown gunner whose reflex had changed a fight. In reality, that gunner, now quietly reassigned to a rest period after his tour, wanted no fame. His crew described him as soft-spoken, meticulous, the kind of man who cleaned his guns twice before every sortie. When interviewed again by squadron intelligence, he shrugged off the acclaim. It wasn't bravery, he said simply. It was math and luck. But for those who fought in the air, luck and math were never separate. In Germany, Luftwaffe reconnaissance teams scoured the crash sites of the downed Messerschmitts. Wreckage scattered across fields, twisted aluminum half buried in winter mud. One of the downed pilots, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, had been an ace with over 30 kills. His loss shocked his staffel, a reminder that even veteran skill couldn't always outthink the geometry of a gunner's angle. Luftwaffe Command, already strained by fuel shortages and mounting losses, began issuing new attack directives. Pilots were warned to avoid extended rear approaches on B-17 formations, especially through cloud layers. Instead, they were ordered to strike diagonally from the upper rear quarter, a tactic that demanded precision but reduced exposure. The change, though subtle, marked the quiet influence of one gunner's reflex. Meanwhile, within the Allied bomber command structure, something shifted as well. Confidence. If tail gunners could truly master deflection, if training could refine those instincts, then survival odds might rise, even marginally. And in a campaign where hundreds of airmen died every month, even small percentages mattered. By early 1944, new gunnery manuals incorporated the phrase anticipatory fire, a direct reflection of the evolving doctrine. It encouraged gunners to read enemy intent through formation patterns and environmental cues rather than sight lines alone. Many didn't realize the concept traced back to one nameless incident, one burst of tracers through blind cloud. In the mess halls, the men didn't speak of doctrine or manuals. They spoke of that B-17, its battered tail, and the gunner who refused to miss. He saw through fog, someone said. He could feel the sky. Such talk wasn't superstition. It was reverence, the kind that soldiers reserve for those who remind them survival is still possible. Photographs from that day still survive. Grainy, monochrome, showing crews leaning against their aircraft. Frost steaming from exhaust stacks, faces half hidden behind goggles and scarves. Among them stands the gunner, unremarkable except for the faintest smile. One born not of triumph, but disbelief. To him, it was just another mission. To the men around him, it became a symbol, proof that courage sometimes hides inside quiet calculation. As command prepared the next waves of bombing raids, the airfields once again filled with the metallic heartbeat of engines. The lessons of the blind shot were already integrated, not formally, not through orders, but through the whispers shared in briefing huts and hangars before takeoff. The war would continue to demand more from all of them. But something had changed. Not in the machinery, nor in the strategy, but in the way airmen trusted their own hands. Weeks turned into months, and the story of the blind shot faded from official communiques, absorbed into the vast machinery of war reports. But within the squadrons, its echo remained. Not as myth, but as quiet proof that instinct could triumph over terror. Across East Anglia, where the great bomber fields stretched like metallic archipelagos, crews prepared for yet another winter of missions. Each dawn brought the same ritual: black coffee, briefing rooms filled with cigarette smoke, and the monotonous voice of the intelligence officer tracing enemy positions on the map. Yet even in that routine, a faint sense of faith endured. Somewhere between the frost and fear, they remembered the man who had fired blind and struck true. New gunners trained under stricter programs now. Instructors emphasized fluid control, target anticipation, and calm under chaos. At the gunnery ranges of Framlingham and Bassingbourn, cadets aimed at moving silhouettes projected onto clouds of smoke. "Don't chase!" the trainers barked. "Predict." They never mentioned the source of the lesson, but its origin was known by those who'd flown before. Meanwhile, the German fighter arm continued to deteriorate. Every loss was now critical, every replacement pilot less experienced than the last. Fuel scarcity reduced flight hours, while the Allied bomber streams grew larger and more heavily escorted. By early 1944, long-range Mustangs began shadowing the formations deep into the Reich, their silver wings flashing above the clouds. The black gaps of isolation were closing. For the men in the fortresses, that meant survival improved. Slightly. But each sortie still tested the human threshold of endurance. Oxygen froze in hoses, blood chilled in veins, frostbite burned through gloves. Even victory came at a cost. The tail gunner whose reflex had rewritten a moment of air war served out his remaining missions quietly. He was recommended for a decoration, though higher command downgraded it to a citation, citing lack of photographic proof for the third confirmed kill. He didn't protest. "Decorations," he once told a crewmate, "don't change the weather up there." When his tour ended, he was rotated back to the United States. His comrades remembered his departure without ceremony. A handshake, a smile, and a final salute beside the airfield fence. The squadron flew again the next morning. That was the rhythm of the air war. No pauses for legends. Years later, historians tracing 8th Air Force archives stumbled upon the mission report. It appeared ordinary. Page after page of sortie details, formation routes, ammunition counts. Only a brief notation stood out in the margins. Tail gunner engaged unseen enemy aircraft through cloud cover. 3 confirmed by visual corroboration. No flourish, no myth, just words typed by a tired clerk who could not have known what they described. For those who studied aerial warfare, that single line became a study in instinctive calculation. Air combat analysts later reconstructed the engagement geometry, the approach angles of the Messerschmitts, the turbulence in the cloud layer, the lead deflection of 50 caliber tracers at 400 yards. Everything matched the improbable. It wasn't luck alone. It was an act of measured perfection executed without sight. In later years, veterans who had flown that same winter spoke of him in mess reunions and museum interviews. One pilot, gray-haired and soft-spoken, recalled, "He didn't talk much, but every man on that plane owed him his life." And so the story endured, not in the headlines of victory, but in the quiet reverence of those who understood the invisible mathematics of war. The Luftwaffe never learned the name of the gunner who had struck them blind that day. To them, he remained a phantom, a nameless adversary who had somehow seen through fog. But in the Allied records, his name remains etched beside the number 3. 3 confirmed kills from a single burst, an impossible ratio born from the harsh logic of survival. Long after the bombers stopped flying, when peace returned to those same skies, fragments of wreckage still surfaced in the fields of northern Europe, reminders of a war fought above the clouds, where courage was often unseen. The tail gunner's turret, recovered decades later and restored in a museum, still carries faint burn marks along the gun barrels. Visitors stand before it in silence, reading the small plaque that tells only part of the story. Few realize that somewhere in that scorched steel once sat a man who fired blind and changed how others aimed forever. The story of the blind shot endures not because it was miraculous, but because it was human. It captures the essence of what defined the air war over Europe. Moments where ordinary men, trapped within steel and freezing air, became instruments of precision and resolve. In the grand scale of World War II, one gunner's reflex might seem like a footnote, a fleeting second amid millions. Yet, history is often shaped by such fragments, the seconds that decide whether 10 men return home or vanish into smoke. His action didn't change the outcome of the war, but it changed the men who witnessed it. It reminded them that instinct, when sharpened by discipline, can see farther than eyes ever could. The B-17 campaigns of 1943 and 1944 demanded a kind of courage few could name. It wasn't the shouting kind, nor the one draped in glory. It was quiet, methodical, cold, the courage of repetition, of climbing back into the same seat day after day, knowing the odds were against you. The tail gunner embodied that truth. His blind shot became more than a legend of marksmanship. It became a symbol of trust. Trust in training, in comrades, in the unseen logic that bound each man in the sky to the others beside him. For every fortress that made it home, there were hundreds that did not. Yet they flew, not for medals, but because duty demanded it. Today, museums preserve their aircraft, restorers polish their aluminum skins, and historians trace their flight paths through fading photographs and combat reports. But the essence of their struggle lies not in machines or maps. It lies in the heartbeat of those who once looked through crosshairs and refused to yield. Somewhere in that gray sky over Europe, amid the smoke and cold, a burst of tracers once carved through cloud and silence. 3 enemy fighters fell, unseen but certain, and in that instant, one man's instinct proved that even in the blindness of war, clarity could still be found, not through sight, but through faith in the unseen geometry of survival.